A lot of veterans walk into a C&P range of motion exam thinking they need to prove how tough they are. They push through the pain. They force the joint as far as it will go. They gut it out the same way they have gutted it out their whole lives. And they walk out thinking they did the right thing, but they may have done the very thing that hurts their claim, not because they lied, not because they exaggerated, not because they did anything wrong on purpose, but because they may have given the examiner a measurement that makes their condition look less severe than it actually is. So here is what you need to understand before your next exam. A C&P range of motion test is not a toughness contest. It is not a test of pride. It is not the time to prove how much pain you can tolerate. It is an evidence collection appointment. And the goal is not maximum motion. The goal is accurate motion. The VA does not just need to know how far you can force a joint when you are pushing through pain. They need to know where pain begins, where weakness starts, where your body begins to guard, and how that condition affects your real function. Those are two very different things, and confusing them can absolutely hurt your VA claim. In this video, I am going to show you what the examiner is usually documenting during a range of motion test, why pushing through pain can create an incomplete record, and what you should do instead when the exam begins. This is part of the C&P Exam Battlefield SOP series, practical, plain English guidance to help veterans walk into these exams better prepared, more aware, and less likely to hurt their own claim by misunderstanding the mission. You are going to leave this video with two things. First, you will understand what the examiner is looking for and why it matters to your rating. Second, you will know how to move during the exam in a way that is honest, accurate, and consistent with what your body is actually experiencing. And let me say this up front. This is not about exaggerating. This is not about acting. This is not about trying to game the exam. This is about accuracy. Because if your body starts hurting at 90 degrees, but you force it to 160 degrees without making that clear, the record may tell a story that does not match your real life. Let's get into it. What the VA is actually measuring. Here is the first thing you need to get right. A range of motion exam is not a competition. The examiner is not grading your effort. They are documenting clinical findings. And those findings can become part of the medical evidence the VA uses to evaluate your disability. So what is the examiner usually trying to document? In plain English, they are looking at 5 things: how far the joint moves, where pain begins, whether your body guards, compensates, or protects the joint, whether repeated movement makes the condition worse, and how flare-ups affect your function. That is the battlefield. That is the terrain. And if you do not understand what is being measured, you may accidentally give the VA an incomplete picture of your condition. Let's break that down. The first thing is measurable limitation. How far can the joint move before pain, stiffness, weakness, or another limitation begins to interfere? That measurement matters. The second thing is painful motion. Does the movement cause pain? Where does that pain start? Is it mild? Is it sharp? Does it pull? Does it burn? Does it cause weakness or loss of control? That matters too. The third thing is guarding or compensation. Is your body protecting the joint? Are you shifting your weight? Are you leaning away from the pain? Are you tightening up because your body knows that movement is going to hurt? That tells a story about how the condition affects your daily function. The fourth thing is repeated use limitation. Sometimes a veteran can do a movement once, but after doing it several times, the joint stiffens, weakens, or becomes more painful. That matters because life does not usually ask you to move one time and stop. Life asks you to climb stairs, lift groceries, bend over, reach into cabinets, get in and out of a vehicle, pick up laundry, mow the lawn, or carry something across the house. Repeated use matters. And the fifth thing is flare-up impact. How does the condition act when it is at its worst? How much function do you lose during those bad days? How does the movement change when the joint is inflamed, stiff, swollen, weak, or locked up? That matters too. Now here is the key point. The maximum number matters, but it is not the whole story. If the examiner only records how far you can force the joint, but the record does not capture where pain begins, where weakness starts, or how repeated use affects you, then the file may not reflect your real functional loss. That is the range of motion trap. You think you are helping yourself by pushing harder, but you may actually be hiding the very evidence the VA needs to understand your condition. The goal is not maximum motion, the goal is accurate motion. How veterans can unintentionally hurt their claim. Here is exactly how this can play out. A veteran walks into the exam. Maybe it is the shoulder, maybe it is the knee, maybe it is the back, maybe it is the neck, hip, ankle, wrist, or elbow. The joint has hurt for years. The veteran already knows certain movements cause pain. They already know some days are worse than others. They already know that if they push too far, they are going to pay for it later. But then the examiner says something like, raise your arm as high as you can, or bend forward as far as you can, or move until you cannot move anymore. And the veteran does what veterans often do. They push, they tolerate it, they grind through it, they try not to complain, they try not to look weak, they force the joint all the way to the point where it physically cannot go any farther. The examiner records the measurement. Let's say the shoulder measures at 160 degrees. On paper, that may look like pretty good movement, but here is what may not get captured. The pain started at 90 degrees. The veteran started guarding at 80 degrees. The shoulder began tightening before that, and after several repeated movements, the shoulder would have been far worse. But none of that may have made it clearly into the record because the veteran pushed through it silently. Now the VA looks at that file and sees a veteran who can raise his arm to 160 degrees. Not necessarily a veteran whose pain begins at 90, not necessarily a veteran whose shoulder weakens with repeated use, not necessarily a veteran who avoids overhead work at home because it causes pain for the rest of the day, not necessarily a veteran who cannot lift something into a cabinet without paying for it later. That is the problem. The record may not reflect the full picture, and the veteran may have unintentionally contributed to a record that does not show what is really happening. Not out of dishonesty, not out of carelessness, but out of toughness, out of pride, out of habit, out of that old mindset that says, push through, don't complain, get it done. That mindset may have served you in uniform, but in a C&P exam, it can work against you because the mission in that room is different. You are not there to prove how much pain you can tolerate. You are there to help the examiner accurately document what the condition does to your body. That is a different mission. And if you do not understand that, you can lose ground, not because you were trying to mislead anyone, not because you were trying to be difficult, but because you treated an evidence collection exam like a toughness test. That is the trap. What accurate performance actually looks like. So what does the right approach look like? When the examiner asks you to move the joint, you move it slowly, honestly, naturally. You do not dramatize it. You do not perform pain that is not there. You do not stop before a real symptom begins. But when you feel the first honest sign of pain, tightness, weakness, pulling, instability, guarding, or functional limitation, you stop and you tell the examiner what you are feeling. That is the point. Do not silently push past it. Do not hide it. Do not force yourself through it just to show effort, because the examiner cannot document what you do not communicate. If the pain starts at a certain point, say it. If the joint begins to tighten, say it. If your body starts guarding, say it. If the movement causes weakness, say it. If you feel unstable, say it, and be specific. You do not need fancy medical language. Plain English is enough. You can say, I feel a sharp pain right here, or that is where it starts pulling, or my back starts tightening at this point, or my knee feels weak when I go past here, or I can move farther, but this is where the pain begins. That last sentence is important. I can move farther, but this is where the pain begins. That tells the examiner the truth. You are not saying you are completely unable to move beyond that point. You are saying this is where the limitation begins, and that distinction matters, because in real life, many veterans can force a movement once, but they cannot use that joint normally without pain, weakness, stiffness, flare-ups, or loss of function. That is what needs to be documented. Again, the goal is not maximum motion. The goal is accurate motion. Now, let me also say this clearly. Do not fake symptoms. Do not exaggerate. Do not stop early just because you think it will help your claim. Do not pretend to have pain where you do not have pain. That is not preparation. That is a credibility problem, and credibility matters. If your records, exam behavior, medical history, and daily function do not line up, that inconsistency can hurt you. So the standard is simple. Be honest. Be accurate, be consistent. Stop when the limitation honestly begins. Name what you are feeling and let the examiner document it. That is how you protect the record without exaggerating and without underreporting your real condition. Repeated use and flare ups. Now, there is another part of this that veterans often miss. A range of motion exam is not only about what happens one time in a quiet exam room. The VA also needs to understand what happens with repeated use and flare ups because your disability does not live in the exam room. It lives in your daily life. It shows up when you climb stairs, when you get out of bed, when you drive, when you stand at the sink, when you carry groceries, when you walk across a parking lot, when you mow the lawn, when you play with your grandkids, when you try to sleep, when you bend over to pick something up, when you reach overhead, when you sit too long, when you stand too long, when you do the same motion over and over again. That is where functional loss shows up. So if the examiner asks whether repeated use makes it worse, do not just say, yeah, sometimes. Be specific. Say something like, after I bend a few times, my back tightens and I have to stop. Or if I use the shoulder overhead, it starts burning and I lose strength. Or my knee may move at first, but after walking or stairs, it gets stiff and unstable. Or on flare up days, I cannot move the same way I can on a normal day. That is not exaggeration, that is context. And context matters because the exam measurement taken in one moment may not fully explain how the condition affects you over a normal day, a bad day, or after repeated use. This is why preparation matters. Before the exam, you should know your own pattern. What movements trigger pain? Where does the pain begin? What happens after repeated use? How often do flare ups happen? How long do they last? What do they stop you from doing? What do you avoid because of the condition? What do you need help with? What takes longer now than it used to? These are the things you want clear in your mind before you walk into that room. Because if you wait until the examiner asks, you may forget. You may minimize it. You may default back to that old habit of saying, I'm fine. And that one phrase, I'm fine, has probably hurt more veterans than they realize. You do not need to complain. You do not need to embellish, but you do need to tell the truth clearly. Common mistakes to avoid. Let's make this practical. Here are the mistakes you want to avoid during a range of motion exam. Mistake number 1, pushing through pain to look tough. That may feel honorable, but it can create an incomplete record. Mistake number 2, waiting until the joint completely fails before you stop. That is not the point. The point is where limitation begins. Mistake number 3, staying silent while the pain starts. If pain begins at 90 degrees, say it at 90 degrees. Do not wait until 160 and then mention it later. Mistake number 4, minimizing your symptoms. Veterans do this all the time. They say, it is not that bad. They say, I can deal with it. They say, other people have it worse. But the exam is not about comparing yourself to other veterans. It is about accurately documenting your condition. Mistake number 5, exaggerating or performing. Do not do that either. You do not need to act. You need to be accurate. And mistake number 6, failing to explain flare-ups and repeated use. If the condition gets worse after activity, say that. If bad days are different from normal days, say that. If you lose function during flare-ups, explain what that looks like. This is where the record becomes more complete, and a complete record is what you want. The 48-hour challenge. Here is your 48-hour challenge. If you have a C&P exam coming up, or you think one may be coming, I want you to write down the movements that cause pain or limitation. Do not make it complicated. Just use plain English. Write down the joint or body part. Write down the movement. Write down where the pain starts. Write down what the pain feels like. Write down what happens after repeated use, and write down what your worst days look like. For example, my right shoulder starts hurting when I raise my arm above shoulder level. My lower back tightens when I bend forward, and after repeated bending, I have to sit down. My knee feels unstable going downstairs. My neck pain gets worse when I turn to the left while driving. My ankle stiffens after walking across a parking lot. That is the kind of information you want clear before the exam. Not rehearsed, not exaggerated. Clear. Because when you walk into that room, you do not want to wing it. You want to know your own body, you want to know your own limitations, and you want to be able to communicate them honestly. Recap. Here is the short version. A C&P range of motion exam is evidence collection. It is not a test of toughness. It is not the time to prove how much pain you can tolerate. The VA needs to understand not only how far the joint can move, but where pain begins, where weakness starts, what happens with repeated use, and how flare ups affect your function. So remember this: the goal is not maximum motion, the goal is accurate motion. Stop at the first honest sign of pain, tightness, weakness, guarding, instability, or functional limitation. Name it clearly, be consistent, do not exaggerate, do not fake anything, but do not push through real limitation just to look strong. That may be the habit that served you before. But in that exam room, accuracy is the mission. If this helped you understand the range of motion trap, the next video in this CMP exam battlefield SOP series is where you need to go next, because stopping at pain is only part of the mission. The next thing you need to understand is how to explain your worst days, flare ups, and functional loss without sounding like you are exaggerating. That matters because a lot of veterans fall into one of two traps. Some minimize what they are going through. They say, I'm fine. They downplay the pain. They leave out the bad days. They do not explain how the condition affects real life. Others go too far the other way. They use broad statements that may sound extreme, unclear, or inconsistent with the rest of the record. Neither approach helps. There is a better way. You need to explain what happens on your bad days clearly, honestly, and in a way that helps the examiner understand how your condition affects real life: walking, standing, lifting, bending, sleeping, working, driving, taking care of daily responsibilities. That is what we are covering next. So watch the next video in this series. And if you want more plain English help preparing for your VA claim, visit veteranclaimsmadeeasy.com. My goal is never to mislead, only to empower you with accurate, honest, and actionable information. Semper Fidelis, and God bless.